Hey everyone! So today we're going to be doing a lab on nested loops. Nested loops are basically when you have a loop inside of a loop. So you might have a repeat inside of another repeat. Now why would you want to do that? It's because sometimes you want to repeat an algorithm multiple times, even if that algorithm itself has some repeats. Now this lab is actually fairly challenging. In my opinion, it's probably the hardest one we've done so far, and it's probably one of the hardest ones we'll do for a while. So what's really important in this one is to really take things step by step. So the final goal in this one is to build a structure that kind of looks like a set of bricks overlaid and offset by a certain amount. So when we actually play it, it's going to look like this. You'll see that we'll build, like they call it a path in the rubric. And this path is kind of like a yellow brick road. And you see that the bricks are offset. You see that each row of bricks is basically offset by about half of a brick. So they're not completely lined up like a grid. Instead, they are just off by half a brick. So that's going to be quite challenging, but you're going to see that if we do things step by step, it should actually be quite attainable. And by the way, you're going to be graded on doing things step by step here. So we don't just need the final solution, we want to see all the intermediate steps as well. So let's get to it. So as usual, we're going to start with a blank slate. We're going to start with a completely empty scene. And we'll start with the most bare minimum amount of tasks that we can. And that would actually just be drawing one single brick. So how do we draw a single brick? Well, we've done this a couple of times already, but let's try to do it very efficiently. So if you read the rubric, it'll say that you will need to draw the brick when, I believe it is the 1 key is pressed. Right? So when we press the 1 key, we want to draw the brick. So let's go ahead and do that. And by the way, we're going to be drawing, as you saw in our demo earlier, from the bottom left all the way to the top right. So we're going to try to draw the brick on the bottom left. So as usual, step 1 is going to be move to the bottom left. All right. Now I know ahead of time that this is going to be negative 180, and I believe y is going to be negative 140. So let's just test that out. Yep, that takes us right where we want, right? No matter what. It always takes us there. Keep in mind you can always click here to figure out where you are if you want to know the specific coordinates. Okay? So let's get started with this then. So we moved the sprite to the bottom left, and we're going to do the usual stuff. We're going to clear things out. We are going to put the pen down, and we're going to start drawing our rectangle. Right? So the brick for the lab is going to be 20 by 10. But for this, I'm going to make it 40 by 20. Okay? And part of the reason is so that you actually have to figure out what you're doing in order to be able to properly draw it. All right, so we're going to do this. We're going to make sure that we're always pointed to the right. So that's one of the first things we'll do. So we point to the right. And finally, we're going to just draw our rectangle. So there's a couple ways to do it. Let's do it the complicated way first. So we're going to do, it's going to be 40 across and then 10 down. So we're going to move 40 steps. We're going to turn 90 degrees to the right. And then we are going to move 20. By the way, we can test this out as we go. Yep, that's where we want to be. We're going to move 20 down. So see how this goes. Oops, put 201. I'm going to move 20 down. Yep, that looks right. Then we're going to turn right again. We're going to move 40. Let's test it out as we go. That's looking correct. Turn 90 once again. And we're going to move the last 20. And just for good measure, we want to make sure that we turn 90 degrees so that we end up facing the same way that we started. So as you can see here, if we press 1, we draw the full brick and we end up right where we started. By the way, let's take a look at what this looks like step by step, just so we're all on the same page. So clear, and then we're going to turn and draw a rectangle, just like we've done many times. Now notice in our code here, this is pretty repetitive. These two parts are exactly the same, right? So this first half and the second half are basically a duplication of the code. So we can actually start by using our first repeat over here. So we can repeat, we can say that basically this algorithm, this set of steps here, to draw a brick is just these 4 steps repeated twice. See, exactly identical. So let's put them inside a repeat, and say that we're doing this twice. And as usual, we're going to test after every single step. So when we do this, we can see that we are going to do that twice. All right, and there we have it. We have our first brick. Now I'm going to go ahead and also do the second brick as part of these steps. Now what you might notice is if we wanted to start drawing another brick right now, it would actually just end up overlapping that first brick. Let's take a look at that. So I know that this will draw a brick. So what happens if I do this twice? So what happens if I repeat this step twice? So we're going to draw this brick twice. And you'll see that we're going to draw the brick, and then we're going to start from the same position. So we actually are just drawing the brick on top of itself. So if we want to draw two bricks, which is the next goal, we are going to need to do something a little different. Now, if we see this, we might notice, all right, if I end up here after drawing the first brick, what I really want to do is as soon as I'm done drawing the brick, I want to move forward this many steps so that I can start from here when I start drawing the next brick. So basically what I want to do is after I'm done drawing the brick, I want to move forward the full width of the brick. Now the brick is 40 wide, right? It's 40 wide and 20 high. So after I draw the brick, let's just do that. Let's just move forward 40 steps. And let's see where that ends up. So if I just run this step, I will see that I'm going to create the brick, and then I'm going to move forward. And if I were to start drawing a brick now, I actually would be exactly in position to draw the next one. So what happens if I repeat that step now? So I'm going to do this twice. You will see that it is going to draw the brick, move forward, and then draw the next brick. And by the way, notice that it moves forward again. So it's actually ready to draw the third, fourth, fifth brick, etc. Which actually means if I take this outer repeat right here and I put 6, it's actually going to go ahead and draw 6 bricks. Let's try this out. And if I change this to 10, it's going to draw 10 bricks. It can even go off the screen. And here you see how just by kind of doing this step by step, we actually were able to figure out what the smallest step is to take, and then by repeating those steps over and over, we can actually do something exactly as we want it multiple times. So basically here's the steps. Clear out everything, initialize properly, figure out the algorithm for doing the one step, make sure your sprite ends up in the position to properly do the next step, so it's exactly where we want it for the next step, and then repeat. Okay, notice that I can even do repeat 1 here, and it'll just draw the 1 brick. All right, and there we have it. We have the entire first part of the lab. The entire first part of the lab is just draw the 1 brick, draw 2 bricks, and then draw the entire row of bricks. Okay, and next we're going to draw additional rows. Okay, so where we left off last time, we basically were able to draw a full row of bricks. So our next step is actually to draw multiple rows. Now in the final response, we actually want to end up with kind of a jagged set of bricks so that they're always offset, so they alternate, sometimes a little more to the left. But what we're going to actually start with is a much easier approach. We're going to basically make a grid. So we're going to just make all the bricks aligned. That's going to make it a little simpler. And then we're going to revisit this and do the offset rows. All right, so let's start with the grid. What I want to first make sure we realize is this is the same code that we just wrote. I'm going to set the repeat to 10, so we draw a full row, just like shown here. And I'm actually going to make a little change here. I am going to make sure that we set our pen down right before we draw the brick, and then we set the pen up when we're done drawing the brick. Basically, we're only really going to be putting the pen down when we're about to draw bricks, and between drawing bricks, we're actually just going to be repositioning the sprite, right? We're not actually going to be drawing. And we've seen this kind of when we wanted to move the sprite a little further ahead, so next time it started drawing the brick, it was drawing the brick in the next viable position, so here and then here, etc. We don't actually need to draw when we're doing that. So putting the pen down and then back up only when we actually need to draw is going to help us a little bit as we do additional steps to reposition. So let's test this out one more time. It's doing what we want. And now what we're going to do is the following. We are going to duplicate this, and we're going to hide this one down here. We're going to come back and use it later, because first we're going to do one version of this, and then we're going to start back with this and revisit that. So for now, I'm going to make this happen when we press the 3 key, so that we can work off that. So what we want is we're going to finish drawing the row, and then we want to draw the next row. Now you might think that the best way to do that is to start from here and go backwards. That's one way to do it, but it's a little bit conceptually easier to actually think about it as more of a repetition of the step we just did. So instead of starting from here and drawing the next row of bricks, we're actually just going to move all the way back to the beginning, move it up, and then start drawing the bricks again. And then move all the way back to the beginning, move up, and draw the next row of bricks. That's going to be the most intuitive way to do this. So how do we do this? Well, after we're done drawing the row of bricks, let's start by figuring out how to move all the way back to where we started. So we drew 10 bricks here, right? And each brick has a width of 40. So we know that to get from here all the way back, we need to go backwards 10 times 40 steps. That's going to be 400 steps. And since we're moving backwards, we know that we can do that by moving negative 400 steps. So moving negative 400 steps will get us all the way from the end, all the way back to where we started, right? Again, that's 10 times 40. So let's try that out. You see we drew the whole row, and then we ended up back in the first square over here, which is great because that's kind of where we started originally. But if we just draw our second row now, we're just going to end up drawing it on top of this one. So not only do we want to move backwards 400 steps, we should also move up 20 steps, because that's how tall a brick is. So we can actually move up without rotating by using this block right here, change y by. So by doing change y by 20, we allow our sprite to shift up by 20 without actually having to rotate the sprite, right? So this will change the y by 20. So let's give that a shot. So you see that we moved back 400, and then we also moved up by 20. So what happens if we now do this? Let's move these further back down so we get a teeny bit more space. Let's see what happens if, after we're done doing all of this, we do all of this again. So remember, this is to just draw the row of bricks, right? So we're going to draw the row and then reposition all the way back and up, and then we're going to draw another row. So what's it going to do now? Draw the row, and then it's going to reposition and draw the next row. In fact, this is pretty repetitive, and we are going to want to do this afterwards anyways, right? So we end up with basically 2 exact lines of groups of code. So what do we do when we have that? We use the repeat block. So instead of just duplicating it, how about we just do it twice? Let's move this in here. And there we have it. We're doing these steps twice. So here's the first one, and here's the second one. And notice that by the end of the second row, we are ready to draw our third row. We're in position to start drawing the third row. So if I were to do this 3 times, we have our third row. And if I were to do this 12 times, we have our entire wall of bricks. So notice that we can use this methodology here to basically draw a grid. Now the problem here is that this is a little incomplete. So we basically got the first row, we drew the second row, which is the second step of the project, and then we drew the entire rest of the wall, which would be the last part of the project. However, we also want the wall to be offset, right? We want the wall to kind of be alternating so that it's kind of like jagged this way. So this doesn't do that. So in the next part, we're going to perform that step. All right, so we're in the home stretch now. As we recall where we left off, we have this nifty grid, which we made our code for over here. Now, this is not enough because what we really want for this lab is a kind of zigzag type pattern where the blocks are offset. To be specific, each block is offset by about half of the previous row. So we're shifted over by like a half brick. So what you might remember is we actually saved our very first row that looks like this. And we're actually going to work from there. We're going to start from that because it's going to be a teeny bit easier. So let's go ahead and throw away what we had over there, or you can keep it around if you want to make sure you have it around. But we're going to start from here. Now, when we did our grid type setup, you remember that from here, we moved back 400 bricks. 400 because we have 10 bricks and each one is 40 wide. So what we're going to do this time is instead of just going back 400, so last time we had move negative 400 steps, we're going to move even a little further. We're going to move 420. Because remember, each brick is 40 pixels wide, so the halfway point is 20. Right, so we're going to move all the way here and then an extra half block. So let's see where that takes us. That looks pretty good, but remember we also want to move up by 20 so that we can start drawing the next row. And remember we did that by using change Y by 20. That moves us up an extra 20. Let's try it out. Cool. So we are right in a position where we can start drawing our second row. So let's go ahead and try that. Let's do all of this, and then let's just go ahead and duplicate this. Let's say we're going to do this again. All right, so there we have it. We're going to do that. We end up here, and then we're going to do it again. All right, so let's go ahead and try it. And that's cool, but you might notice that this is kind of what we want. We have the jagged wall, but look where we ended up. We ended up right here, and you can already tell that if we start drawing a row right now, we are not going to have quite what we were hoping for. In fact, let's go ahead. This is obviously repeated code, so let's go ahead and use a repeat here. So let's move this to here, and let's do this twice. So what will this look like if we do it twice? It'll be just like what we did. But what happens when we do it 3 times? Notice what happened here. Instead of going zigzag, we just kind of are drawing a wall diagonally going up. It's not quite what we want. You'll notice as we go up to 4 or 5, we're just going to keep going that way. And why is that happening? It's because every time when we reach the end, we're just moving back even a little further back and back and back. So we are never quite getting back to the right part of our wall. Now, what should we do here? Here's where this lab gets pretty tricky. We're actually thinking about this right now as individual rows. But actually, let's take a look at that picture with the zigzag wall. And what we actually might find is that the pattern here is not so much that they're individual brick rows, even though that is part of the pattern. The other part of this pattern is there are actually pairs of rows that look similar. So each one of these pairs of rows is actually a duplicated above it, right? So we can see this as drawing this wall in pairs. So we'll draw a pair, and then we will go to the right position, then we'll draw another pair, go right to the back to the right position, and draw another pair, etc. So we're not drawing this in rows anymore. We're going to be drawing this in pairs of rows. So what would this look like? So let's start with just our 2 rows. So this is our pair of rows that we're going to be drawing, right? And now, when we end up here, after drawing our pair, all we're going to do is we're going to just move right back to here. So we're going to move forward by a full brick. We're going to go forward 1 whole brick. So we're now like kind of ahead by a full brick. We're going to move back 1 brick, right? So let's do that. So we're pointing to the right, so all we got to do is move forward 40 bricks. Let's see what happens now. And there we are. We are actually in position to draw our next row. So this right here, this whole thing, let's label it. Let's see what we have. As we remember, this little repeat block right here, this draws 1 brick, right? Draw a brick. So this repeat draws a brick. What about this one? This repeat 10, if we want to comment on it, we will say that this draws a row of bricks. Cool, and that's all good. Now what do these do? This one does. This one is draw a pair of zigzag rows, right? It draws 1 row and then it draws the other one in zigzag. And we can even add a little more to that. We can say, and go back to the right. Because that's what we're doing, right? We are drawing a pair, and then we are, instead of staying here, we're going back to the right. Start over here. Now, what happens if we just repeat this a whole bunch of times? We repeat all of these pairs. What if we do this 3 times? Let's take a look. So remember, this draws this pair of bricks right here, right? Look at this. I have now drawn 3 pairs of zigzag bricks, right? Here's one pair of zigzag bricks, another pair of zigzag brick rows, and the third pair. So we're drawing these, we're repeating in pairs. And you see now how these form a pattern, right? Each one of these is kind of a pattern. This really shows you, this lab, why it's so valuable to go step by step. Because instead of trying to think of the whole big thing, what you can actually do here is you can just do one step, think of like just the smallest step, and you can repeat that step to come to the conclusion you want. So you do a step, you reposition, and you repeat that step. All right? Now, look at this. We just did 3, but what happens if we do 6? Look at that. We have our whole wall. So just like that, it's almost kind of magical. We managed to draw the whole wall. I think if you do 10, you should be able to complete it. You should be able to draw the whole thing. And there you have it. This is the whole wall. Now let me go back and go back a couple steps and revisit what we did here, because this might have all kind of happened very quickly. So remember that we basically started with just this, right? Which was just our row. And then we moved back to be ready for the second row. And then we did that twice, right? So just by repeating that row twice and making sure we move back a little bit, we have 2 rows. But what we notice is we're no longer in position for the subsequent rows. So after we do our pair of rows, we just move forward. All right. And what we can see now is we have a pair of rows, and we are right in position to draw the next row. So we just keep repeating that. Just put that in a repeat 10. And there you go. You have the magical brick road, the yellow brick road. This is a very tricky lab. I encourage that you practice with this one. You give it a shot a couple times. You try to understand each individual step and how it works. And you'll find that as you work it step by step and as you do the small steps and then try putting that into repeats, it'll start making a little bit more sense. But with that, we're done with this one, and we can move on with the next labs. So I will see you next time.